Good evening. Welcome. We'll be in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. We'll read 12 real quickly. And I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly, for what can the man do that cometh after the king, even that which has been already done? Lord, we thank you for everything. Lord, we take so much for granted. You give us much, and we oftentimes fail to recognize it. We praise you for your constant abiding care on our lives. Sometimes we don't feel like we have that care when we're going through so many tough things. We just lift up people that are going through one thing after the other. We just ask that you just meet them and encourage them as only you can. So Lord, we thank you and we praise you, and we ask that you just anoint this message, anoint my ability to speak it out according to your purpose, that what people need to hear, they will hear. What people need to take in, they will take in. What people need to understand, they will understand according to your Spirit. So we thank you for everything, and we say this in your name. I entitled this message, Something is Missing. Now my question is, what is the advantage of wisdom over foolishness? Riches over the poor. What can a king enjoy that a man of less means can't? Perhaps a less fortunate man may not experience, life from the front seat, but there's always balconies in life that he can enjoy, participate from when it comes to life. Now, we know that we'd like to think we're exceptions. We'd like to think we're above the challenges of life. We'd like to think there's merit in life. That depending on our status, depending on what we think our worth is, we think we should be spared some of the things that we often look down at our nose at. What we think is foolish and stupid. And this is what we're going to see that this preacher, we know Solomon, really thought about. He thought that because of who he was, because he had wisdom, that life should be different, life should treat him different, he should come out on top, he shouldn't have the same struggles when it all comes down to as the foolish man, as the one that's lesser than him. People, we're all there when we start out our Christian walk. It's only by the grace of God and the fact that he allows us to be broken that we can be brought to the end of ourselves and realize, hey, we're no different than that person when it comes to the current of life. It is what it is. And Solomon looked at everything, and this is Solomon, he's the preacher. Perhaps a man of less means will not taste the rich food, know the best wines, know what it means not to work to survive, because that's what most mankind are doing, working to just survive. He figured, as you look at it, that the less fortunate, they have to oftentimes sell for the crumbs that leaves them with just enough, because when it comes down to it, man does not need that much to feel satisfied anyway. if he's honest with himself. He's not a glutton that consumes all, that man. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need riches to taste rich foods. He accepts that what he has is all he needs. That's hard. When you live in a society of abundance, when you live in a society that can lack much, well, a few, I should say, have too much. But what man has not tasted, he will not miss. That's what we don't know. What a man has no knowledge of does not necessarily make him ignorant of what's important. That's what Solomon didn't understand. In some cases, the less fortunate, and you and I know that, may have more of a pulse on life than that of a king who experiences everything. Especially if they learn something very important. It's called contentment with what they do have. I want you to look at 1 Timothy 6 through 9. 1 Timothy 6. Through 9. It says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. Did you notice that? Godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and guess what? It is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith, what? Content. But they that will be rich fall into temptation. Notice what it says. They fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money, and we all know this, right, is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. So, you want to be rich? In what? James 2:5 says that we, as believers, should be rich in faith. Oftentimes, we find that faith at the greatest times of loss, sorrow, and despair. Now, instead of thinking that they can find such people, that they can find meaning in experiencing everything that's set before them, and that's what Solomon thought, they have found contentment in what they have been entrusted with. What have you been entrusted with? Are you content? If you're not content, you're not faithful to it either. Now, perhaps such individuals who are lesser than the king in nominal positions, perhaps they will not hear the most stirring music unless it's from a distance. They probably are not able to walk in the most beautiful gardens of the world, sit amidst great tables of abundance provided by rich hosts. Perhaps they can't do that. Perhaps this is all true about them, but a man who has learned to enjoy life by just being alive, to experience what life is really about, may actually possess the secret of joy. Perhaps. Perhaps he appreciates his humble cottage, enjoys the company of those he loves that are around him. Maybe he even smells the flowers and the spices, sits back a while, and enjoys the colors of creation. Perhaps that type of individual that's underneath that servant, that common man, perhaps that individual, guess what, proves to be the wisest of all men in the end, if he has learned contentment. Did Solomon have contentment? No, he didn't. That's why he was on his pursuit. He didn't understand that, though. I can tell you right now, anybody that's not content with what they have, they're not grateful, they don't recognize it, they're on a pursuit for more. And what will they end up with? Think about what I'm saying today, because this is at the heart of this right now. This is at the heart of what Solomon is saying about his life, about all of his pursuits. You see, a person who is content does not desire all he sees, because he only needs what is necessary. And the greatest thing about that person is he so often stands in awe of the artistic ways of God. You see, people who want more, people who are not settled, don't stand in awe of God and what he has given, what he has shown, what he is all about. Now, Solomon's heart was to pursue all things, to know all things, whether it really is something beneficial to him. But if you have a heart of contentment, you don't need to pursue all things. Guess why? Because you learn to keep matters simple. In such a way, this person discovers, who keeps matters simple, the simplicity of the secret of possessing true wisdom. So the more you pursue the things of this world, the more you lose the edge of wisdom. Because the greatest part about wisdom is to help you settle for what you have. The wisdom to see what you have. The wisdom to know it's been provided to you. Solomon had wisdom, but it was wisdom that couldn't see what was really the wisest thing. A person who has contentment has learned to be content. Philippians 4:11 says, "Not that I speak in respect of want, for I've learned." Notice he said, "I have learned." It's not handed to you. "I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therein be content." Therein be content. You know why temptation often wins out? We read it. We read it in Timothy. Did you notice what it says? The reason temptation often wins out with mankind is because he is not satisfied. He is not content. Because the king had the means to experience all, and he would. But guess what? At the end of it, he realized something. He realized that something was still missing. The truth is, if you approach life, the flesh and the world, the way the king did, and you even secure it, you will always feel there's something missing. You will feel there's something missing in everything. Now, as a fleshly man, Solomon could taste. As a soulish man, he could experience all of this, all kinds of sensations. As a man in search of that which would bring meaning, happiness, and success, he still came to the conclusion that something was missing. You see, when something's vanity, what it's saying, something's missing. There's no substance, there's no purpose. It's not satisfying, it's not complete, something's missing. You see, for the one who is content, it does not matter what he sees. It really doesn't. And it's not going to create desire if he does see something, for guess what? He's wise enough to know what constitutes real beauty, real life, real purpose. And the one that's always on the pursuit misses it all. Now, as king, he could push the lines. He could break through the barriers. He could ignore the law. He could justify questionable actions in his own life. But that's not true for the man who is subject to all matters. He can't push the line. He can try. He can try to break the barriers, but someone's going to hold him accountable. For the wise, law-abiding man, he doesn't have to travel down roads to realize that no trespassing signs have legitimacy to them. If he's honorable, he knows that by pushing lines to see how far he can go, he often realizes that he avoids reaping the consequences too. However, the king decides the rules he's going to keep, determines the laws others keep, tells the servant what to do. The problem with the king, he had no one to answer to except his Creator. I want you to know your greatest liberty is to have the fear of the Lord and know you're going to answer to Him, no matter your status. If you have the fear of the Lord, you're going to discipline yourself. You're going to say, down the line, He's going to ask me to give an account of my life, of my time, of my words, of what I did for others. He's going to ask me that. But when you're the end of yourself, you're the independent, you're the king, you're the big honcho, you don't think about that. You're only looking around seeing what you can have, what you can experience. Was this Saul's problem? Yes, it was. Yes, it was. The preacher admitted he desired to consider everything in light of wisdom. It was his heart to do so, right? As king, he thought he could handle it. He thought he could handle it because he had a gift of wisdom. How much does that sound like us? Well, I can handle it. I can handle what? Heresy. I can handle defilement. I can walk through the cesspool. And it won't affect me. See, probably the biggest one that was kidding themselves was Solomon himself. God didn't give him wisdom so he could experience the world. God gave him wisdom so he would know how to serve God. So he would know how to be wise as a leader with the people. So he would know not to go here or go there. But instead, Solomon saw his wisdom as something that would guard and protect him. And where did he end up being? A fool in the end. He did not, along his road, along his travel, stop for 1 minute and say, you know what? I've experienced this, I've experienced that, and yet something's missing. I'm not satisfied. Oh yeah, I have my moments, but I'm not satisfied. Oh, if we could talk to our children. We could talk to teenagers. Oh, if we could just tell them in the end, when you come to the end of what you think is so important in your life, about experiencing the world and tasting the world and going after the world, that you're still going to come up knowing something's missing. But you see, foolishness won't accept that. Foolishness will never accept that. Because arrogance thinks we're exception to the rule. Now we looked at this king because he had no one to answer to. I want you to know that wisdom, please hear me, wisdom brings a contrast. And it usually comes after the deeds. Now, wisdom can happen in 2 ways. Wisdom can say, you are walking in the wrong direction, don't be a dummy. But most of wisdom is gained because we've been foolish. Most of wisdom is gained after we do our deeds and pay the consequences. That's when we get wise. Through that whole journey, we think, oh, well, this is going to help me get through this. This is going to help me do this. We're self-deluding ourselves. Our arrogance is setting us up for a fall. That's why the Bible, and here is a man who wrote it how many times, Solomon? Pride sets you up for a fall. And yet his pride set him up for the fall. He didn't recognize what his pride was. It was conceit. He was conceited. Don't be wise in your own conceit. But he became wise in his own arrogance and pride. That's the problem. Because he really thought he could handle it because of his wisdom. He had no healthy fear of the Lord. You know what healthy fear of the Lord will often enable you to have? Something called discretion, discernment. When you get more and more involved in the world, you lose your discernment. When you become more focused on your pursuit to gain whatever, you lose your discretion. He couldn't, in the end, avoid the temptations. You see, what he didn't realize in his wisdom, those pursuits were temptations. They were not. He thought they were temptations. To go after something that had no purpose and no meaning. That's the temptation. It's very interesting to follow him in his understanding. Okay? But in his mind, he had it within his heart to reason out the matters of the world. He had it all. But he was not content. He believed there was more to the world than what he knew. He believed there was more to the world than vanity. And yet that's all he tasted. Let's look at 13. Then I saw that wisdom excelled folly as far as light excels darkness. Now, Solomon's only consolation concerning his wisdom, after realizing that all of his pursuits, whatever he was after, was vanity, was that at least his wisdom was better than folly. That's his only consolation. I want you to think about that for a minute. Wisdom is better than folly. Why? Because wisdom keeps you from looking like a fool. Folly reveals that you are one. Okay? That's the only reason. Can you imagine how he wrestled with that a bit? That's his only consolation at this point. So let's look at 14. It says, the wise man's eyes are in his head at least. He's looking at things head on. He's being realistic. Okay? But the fool walks in darkness. And I myself perceive also that one event happens to them all. One event. What one event? Death. Does death have any favorites? Does death pass around and pass over? We're all heading towards our demise. It doesn't matter who you are. Was this hard for the conceited Solomon? You bet. You bet. You're going to see him struggle with it. Well, shouldn't I be an exception? Look at what I built. Look what I had. Doesn't that count for something? Oh, if we would ask these questions before we run down these vain, useless roads, take these rabbit trails, whatever you want to call them. Waste our time, our energy, our strength, our youth. I could go on and on and on. But we don't. We don't. Because we think we're an exception. We think it's not going to happen to me. We can't imagine it. He could see that, yes, with his wisdom, he's able to look at something for what it is. And the fool is in darkness. He's walking in darkness. And it will be very clear that, of course, he's going to fall off the edge before maybe a wise man. He's going to fall into a ditch. You have to realize that Solomon's consolation was short-lived when he realized the challenges of life, the troubled waters, the storms of this age come on both the wise and the foolish. It's not merit-based. So he looks at this, 16. For there is no remembrance, this is what he had to realize, of the wise more than of the fool forever, seeing that which now is in the days to come shall all be forgotten. And how dieth the wise man as the fool? That's hard. That's hard to take. You mean that terrible person over there that lived this terrible life is equal to me in the end? I have nothing to show for it. He's equal to me. We're going to die the same. We're going to end up the same. Now, this had to be hard for Mr. Solomon. But you know what? That's a conclusion we have to come to before we wake up, get real, and come back to center. Because until we do, we keep pursuing. Until we do, we think, if I get over that mountain, I'm going to find what I'm looking for. If I can just have this, I'm going to be happy. A fool will never get it. No, they won't. He had to admit something that was even more despairing to him. And that is, there's no remembrance of the foolish or the wise past this world. All this great work, all this great wisdom is no different. We're not going to be remembered. The wise man or the fool. That's hard. That's hard to admit. How could this man, who looked at it and said, okay, past this world, it's over with, okay? He had to admit neither one, the wise or the foolish man, will leave a lasting mark on this world. He admitted the days to come will wipe out those that have gone on before. You see, it's easy to believe that foolishness, which is nothing, would be forgotten, as well as vanity. Oh, that seems fair, doesn't it? But wisdom, he couldn't get it. But wisdom, should that not be remembered in some way? How can we just, it's not going to be remembered. Wisdom is not going to be remembered. I mean, doesn't wisdom have some clarity, some mark, something eternal about it? I want you to know, wisdom is the head. Wisdom is like hidden gems, okay? It's true, it's hidden gem. Wisdom is very priceless, okay? Wisdom may leave a nugget here or there. It may leave behind a vein of truth to be discovered by those seeking it. It's priceless gem for others to find. When I go, okay, I may leave some wisdom behind, but it's for others to find. It's for others to use, not for me. Why? It's not my wisdom. All real wisdom comes from above. It belongs to God. It's not for man to claim. It's for man to discover. It's for man to be enriched by. But it's not his. It's not his. You can't take credit for that which hasn't originated with you. Nothing originates with man. All good gifts come from who? God. You can't lay claim to something that's not yours. You can't expect to take what's not yours and say, here it is, now I have a right. Now it should be remembered. It's from God. Wisdom wasn't going to distinguish him when he stood at the door of death. Wisdom would distinguish him in his life to a point, but not at the door of death. That was hard for him to get around in his mind. You see, wisdom may be preserved, but man's existence will not even be noted in any way. The wise man will just die like those who are foolish. Now, we know that Solomon is remembered because of the Bible. Because of the Bible. If it wasn't for the Bible, Solomon would not be remembered. His name would mean nothing. But it's because of the Bible he's remembered. And it's not because of his wisdom. Because it came from God, didn't it? Solomon's remembered because of his place in history and prophecy. So what do you think when you think of Solomon? Oh yeah, God gave him wisdom. We have books in the Bible that's written by him. But you know what you're left with? He became a fool in the end. His example wasn't that of wisdom, honor. It was that of someone who unwisely came into agreement with the ungodly and ended up in idolatry. We remember him mainly for his failure in the end. We can follow his life, we can admire him, and then we begin to see him heap everything upon himself. And then he goes right into idolatry. That's the example he left. That's the legacy he left. You see, it's not how you start, it's how you end. You can start well and end in complete destruction and disaster. That's what we remember about Solomon. And I think that when he wrote this book, Ecclesiastics, he probably would admit, I don't want to be remembered at all. Because there's no victory. He didn't even say who he was in this book. He didn't say, I'm Solomon. We know who he is because of what he said, son of king, king of Israel. We know it. But how did he present himself as a preacher? As a preacher. He was a son of a king, and he was a king. Son of David, but he was a preacher. That's how he wanted to be. He didn't name himself. He didn't come out and totally identify himself, because you know why? The legacy he left as a king. This is hard for someone like Solomon, who was taking so much pride in what he thought he knew, what he understood, to just realize these realities. He began to realize he could not leave a lasting mark any more than a foolish man. He realized that his wisdom may have been great, but it was great because of God, not because of him. He realized, as a preacher, that he didn't want to be identified because of the legacy, I would gather, he left behind. Now here we have to note that in his greatness he failed the greatest test of all, even with all of his wisdom he did. Well, we notice how God blessed him, but he became a fool because of sin. And that's what will make you a fool, people. Sin is sin. And he left a legacy in shambles. In the end, what we end up with is nothing. What we often leave behind, if we're not part of the great cloud of God's witness, is the example of fools and foolishness. Now consider the attitude he took on about all of this. This is very interesting to me, because so many times I've read Ecclesiastics more than once. I've read through the Bible, I've studied it, but I really didn't take note of this until really looking at it. He'd come out to this reality that was very hard on him. And so look at verse 17. This is really interesting. He says, therefore I hated life. That's a pretty tough statement. Therefore I hated life. Why? Because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me. He says, I hated life. Many people think when you say, when you have a hard time, I hate life, what do you think about? Well, everybody goes to the idea of self-esteem. People just don't love themselves enough. See, he hated life. He didn't say he hated himself. He said he hated life. What's he talking about? He's talking about his existence. I hate my existence. I don't hate myself. I hate my existence. It's not what I thought it was. It's not what I thought it should be. I hate my existence because it's empty and there's vanity and I've got nothing to show for it, really. It has nothing to do with self-esteem. The truth is we love ourselves too much. It's all about me, myself. What I hate, if I hate anything, is the life I'm now living. It's drudgery. It's overwhelming. It's not serving my purpose. When people talk about suicide, I hate to talk about it because it's so hard. And they say, well, if that person just loved themselves. No, that person couldn't handle their existence. That's what they're trying to escape their existence. I want out of here. It doesn't make sense. It hurts. It's despairing. It's their existence. We need to get that in our mind. Jesus acknowledged that man loves himself. He acknowledged it. That's why he said, deny yourself. Paul brought it out. What these two men brought out is, man, what? Considers himself. He cares for himself. He does all he can do to what? Bring pleasure to himself. That's what Solomon was about. He was seeking to bring pleasure to himself. Why did he hate his existence? Again, he had it all. He had it all, right? And yet, when you end up with vanity, you have nothing at all. The all of vanity becomes a silent mockery to you and all your pursuits and all you think is important, all you think you have. The truth is, life does not make sense. It doesn't make sense. To the one who seeks meaning and purpose in it for themselves. The more you seek this life out and everything you think it has for yourself, it's going to be less meaningful. It's going to be less, it's not going to have any purpose. You're going to come to the end of it and say, what have I done? What have I to show for it? Oftentimes people that come to the end of themselves this way, to try to make sense, to try to have this lasting impression, it will leave them bitter and skeptical towards its very existence. Life. At this point, life is like partaking the bitterness that becomes gall to you, and the reality causes a type of hopelessness in you to land on you, to embrace, engulf you. It robs you of purpose. It causes you to doubt the significance of your existence. Why am I here? It brings grievous reality, something that's too great to bear, that your troubled mind can't handle, that your tormented soul just can't bear it, and your lean spirits just leave you absolutely in despair. That's what it all leaves us, each of us. The problem is, if you try it all, and yet something is missing, and you're watching the sun go up and down, and you get closer to the twilight of your years without discovering the meaning to your life, the purpose of it all, it seems useless. It all seems useless. Your life, your things, your accomplishments, it all seems useless. As the darkness of death encloses on you, and there's nothing to show for this life, it will once again prove to you that it's all vanity, which brings you back to the vexation of spirit. Let's look at 18. Yea, yes, I hated all my labors which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. Do you hear what he says? I do all of this, and guess what? It's the guy that follows me that gets it. I'm not taking it with me. It's not going to be my, God, look what I did down here. That's hard. That's hard. So, when you come to the harsh reality that all of a sudden your hard labor will not benefit you beyond this life, and it's going to be left for another to enjoy, someone who didn't labor for it. Life seems unfair. That is so unfair. How can that be? Oh my, when it comes to this point, our life truly does seem unfair. And as we begin to look about and realize we had worked so hard for it, to in the end mean nothing. So another's going to enjoy the labors of it. They're not going to appreciate the sacrifice. They're not even going to understand the sacrifice. And that's when you begin to hate your labors even. They begin to mock you. You know that? What happens? That's when people hit midlife crisis. This is a midlife crisis. Solomon hit this midlife crisis. Nothing makes sense at that point. All seems empty that you've done. And you begin to question life. And you see it as a big joke at best. And a complete mockery to you. You work the game to realize something is still missing. All your hard work, something's still missing. Why? Because you're not content. You're not content. You're still empty. And life seems to mock you at every turn, no matter what you've done. Well, I'm going to tell you something. As long as God is missing from the equation, there you go. As long as God's not your search, as long as God is not the point of your pleasure, the source of your wisdom, as long as God is not in this whole scenario, and keep it in mind, the life He's given you is not preferred above the world. Serving Him is not your goal. Understand me. And His glory, not your pursuit. And guess what? No matter who you are, what you know, something will always be missing from your life.